Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered why, even after walking away and cutting all contact, the narcissist in your life seems unsettled, restless, or even discarding the new supply in frustration? What if I told you it's not about them and it's not about the new person, it's about you? That your absence, your silence, your healing, and the power you reclaim is the very force that shakes their world. Today, I'm going to show you how choosing yourself, standing in your worth, and stepping fully into your freedom becomes the invisible power no narcissist can ever resist or replace. When you go no contact, something profound happens that most people never realize at first. Your absence becomes a mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that reflects truth. Narcissists survive by controlling perception. They regulate their sense of self through reactions, attention, emotional dependency, and constant engagement. When you are present, even in pain, they can shape the narrative. But when you disappear, when you stop responding, explaining, defending, or reacting, that control collapses. Silence removes their ability to distort reality. Without you there to absorb their projections, the narcissist is left alone with themselves. And that is the one place they never want to be. Your absence forces them to face the emotional void they work so hard to avoid. The mirror appears not because you say anything, but because you say nothing. No contact strips away the distractions they use to escape accountability. They begin to feel exposed, unsettled, and internally destabilized, not because you attack them, but because you stop buffering their discomfort. This is why your absence feels threatening. It reminds them of what they cannot control: your autonomy, your healing, your independence. When you were available, they could define you, manipulate your reactions, and use your empathy as leverage. When you are gone, they lose that power, and in that loss, they are confronted with the truth that they are not as influential, desirable, or irreplaceable as they need to believe. The mirror your absence creates doesn't show them you as the problem. It shows them themselves. Their insecurities, their emptiness, their fear of abandonment, their lack of emotional depth all rise to the surface. And because they cannot tolerate that reflection, they scramble for distraction, validation, or replacement. But no new supply can fully remove the image your absence leaves behind. Your silence doesn't punish them, it reveals them. And once that mirror is standing there, once your absence has forced them to see what they've been running from, something else begins to unravel. Because healing, real healing, is not quiet in the way they expect. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't plead. It simply changes you. And that change disrupts everything they once relied on. Narcissistic control feeds on emotional availability, on wounds that are still open, on reactions that prove they still matter. But when you begin to heal, your energy shifts. You no longer respond from pain, fear, or the need to be understood. You stop offering emotional access, and that is devastating to someone who survives on emotional supply. Your healing removes the fuel they once used to keep themselves steady. What makes this so unsettling for them is that they feel it without being able to touch it. They sense the distance. They notice the lack of reaction. They feel the absence of emotional charge. And suddenly the old buttons don't work. The manipulation that once sparked guilt or confusion now meets silence. The tactics that once pulled you back now fall flat, and that tells them something they don't want to know. They are no longer in control. Your healing exposes the truth that their influence was never strength. It was access to your empathy, your patience, your willingness to self-abandon. And when you take that back, the power dynamic collapses. They may try to recreate it elsewhere, but it doesn't feel the same because the issue was never the supply. It was the wound. This is why your growth becomes destabilizing. Not because you are doing anything to them, but because you are no longer doing something for them. You are no longer carrying their emotional weight. You are no longer regulating their sense of worth. And in that absence, the illusion they built begins to crack. Healing doesn't just free you. It dismantles the system that once depended on your pain. And when that system begins to crack, when your healing has removed the emotional fuel and your absence has taken the mirror away, the illusion they try to build with someone new starts to wobble. From the outside, it may look like they've moved on, like the new supply is winning, smiling, chosen. But the truth is far quieter and far more tragic. The new supply is not winning. They are being positioned. Because what the narcissist seeks is not love, not connection, not growth. It is regulation. Someone to stabilize what they cannot hold on their own. And the new supply steps into a role already scripted, already worn thin by repetition. They are not entering a love story, they are entering a cycle. At first, the performance is convincing, charm flows, promises sparkle. But underneath, something is missing. The depth isn't there. The emotional resonance feels shallow. Because the narcissist is still reacting to the absence you created, still unsettled by the loss of control, still comparing the action they once had to the one in front of them now. And that comparison is not conscious, it's energetic. They feel that the new supply doesn't respond the same way, doesn't absorb the same weight, doesn't soothe the same wounds. Not because the new supply is flawed, but because they are not you. Not the version of you who once carried the emotional labor, the empathy, the understanding. This is where the fantasy starts to collapse. Irritation replaces excitement. Devaluation replaces idealization. The narcissist becomes restless, critical, disengaged, and the new supply, unaware of the pattern, begins to chase, to doubt themselves, to feel the confusion you once felt. This is the quiet truth. The discard is not about the new supply's failure. It is about the narcissist inability to recreate what your presence once provided. Your absence changed the equation, and no replacement can compensate for the power you reclaimed by walking away. And as that comparison deepens, as the narcissist becomes more aware of what no longer feels the same, another truth rises to the surface, one they've spent a lifetime avoiding. What unsettled them about you was never just what you gave, but who you were beneath it all. Your authenticity was never something they could manufacture, imitate, or replace. Because while narcissism survives on performance, image, and illusion, authenticity lives in truth. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't bend itself to be chosen. It doesn't disappear. To keep the peace. And once you begin to reclaim that truth, once you stop shrinking yourself to maintain connection, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The new supply may perform perfectly. They may admire loudly, comply quickly, mirror eagerly, but something essential is missing: depth. There is no challenge to the false self, no quiet strength that forces self-reflection, no grounded presence that can't be controlled. What you brought wasn't just affection, it was substance. And substance is threatening to someone who survives by pretending. Your authenticity acted like a light in a room built for shadows. It exposed inconsistencies. It asked questions without speaking. It reflected emotional truth simply by existing. And the narcissist felt that even if they couldn't name it, they sensed that you saw them more clearly than they could tolerate. This is why they couldn't simply replace you. Performance can copy behavior, but it cannot replicate essence. The new supply may echo your words, repeat your gestures, even mirror your empathy, but it's imitation, not embodiment. And the narcissist knows it on a visceral level. Your authenticity didn't just connect with them, it disrupted them. It made the illusion harder to maintain. And once you chose yourself, once you stepped fully into your truth, that disruption followed you out the door, leaving behind a dynamic that no performance could sustain. And when authenticity walks away, when the light leaves the room, something unexpected happens. The silence starts to speak, not in noise, not in confrontation, not in explanation, but in presence, or rather, in the unmistakable absence of it. Your silence becomes a language the narcissist understands far more deeply than words, because words can be twisted, emotions can be exploited, reactions can be used as proof of relevance. But silence? Silence offers no handle, no leverage, no entry point. And to someone who depends on engagement to feel real, that silence becomes deafening. Your lack of response sends a message you never had to say out loud. You no longer need to be understood by someone who refused to understand you. You no longer need validation from a dynamic that drained you. And that message lands with more force than any argument ever could. This is where the narcissist feels most unsettled, not because you are attacking, but because you are unreachable. They test the old pathways, a provocation, a subtle reminder, a manufactured crisis, and nothing comes back. No emotional spike, no reassurance, no anger, just stillness. And that stillness tells the truth. It says the role they once assigned you no longer exists. It says your energy is no longer available for regulation, distraction, or repair. It says you have stepped out of the story entirely. Silence becomes your boundary, your strength, your declaration of self-respect. It communicates confidence without arrogance, clarity without cruelty. And because it can, be manipulated, it forces the narcissist to sit with what remains, their discomfort, their emptiness, their loss of control. This is why your silence echoes so loudly in every interaction they try to create elsewhere. It lingers, it follows them, it reminds them that the connection they once exploited is no longer accessible. And that reminder shapes everything that comes after. And even when there are no words, no messages, no visible connection at all, something deeper is still communicating. Because energy doesn't need an invitation, it doesn't require proximity, it doesn't wait for permission. Energy moves and it tells the truth long before the mind can explain it. When you choose silence, when you step into authenticity and hold your boundary without announcement, your energy shifts. It settles. It becomes grounded, self-contained, no longer reaching outward for validation or resolution. And that shift is felt, even across distance, even across time, even without contact. The narcissist feels it as a loss of gravity. The pull that once drew you back, that kept you orbiting their moods and needs, is gone. And suddenly, they're unanchored. They may not consciously think of you, but they feel the absence of your emotional presence. The dynamic has changed at its core. This is what unsettles them the most. They can no longer read you. They can no longer sense your availability. They can no longer rely on the emotional tether that once connected you. Your energy no longer bends toward them. It belongs to you now. And because narcissistic control depends on emotional access, this energetic shift disrupts their sense of power. They try to recreate it elsewhere, but the resonance isn't there. The connection feels hollow, unstable, fleeting. They chase the familiar sensation, the depth, the grounding, the intensity, without realizing it was never something they owned. It was something you brought. Your energy was the stabilizer. Your presence was the anchor. And when you withdrew it through healing and self-respect, the imbalance became unavoidable. The narcissist feels exposed, restless, dissatisfied, not because you are doing anything to them, but because your energy is no longer compensating for what they lack. This is the invisible truth. Even in silence, even in absence, your healed energy speaks. And it speaks louder than any attempt they make to replace it. And when that energy no longer bends, when the tether is gone, and the silence holds steady, the final realization begins to surface. You are no longer playing the role you were cast in. Not the caretaker, not the fixer, not the emotional translator, not the one who absorbs the fallout so everything else can stay intact. For the narcissist, relationships are not mutual experiences, they are scripts. Everyone has a part to play, a function to serve, a purpose tied to regulation and control. And for a long time, you played your role with heart, depth, and sincerity. You show up, you carried weight that was never yours. You made the story work. But the moment you stopped, truly stopped, the narrative collapsed. Because roles only exist when someone agrees to perform them. And when you stepped back, when you reclaimed your energy and your identity, the structure had nothing left to stand on. The lines went unsaid. The cues were missed. The predictable reactions never arrived. This is why everything begins to feel chaotic on their side. They don't just lose you, they lose the version of themselves that existed in relation to you. Without your role, they don't know who they are in the dynamic. They can't regulate, reflect, or reinforce the illusion. They may try to assign the same role to someone new, but it doesn't fit. The chemistry feels forced, the rhythm is off. Because roles built on emotional labor and self-abandonment cannot be replicated without consent, your refusal to play doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from clarity. You saw the pattern, you recognized the cost, and you chose to exit the stage rather than sacrifice yourself for a story that was never yours. And when you leave the script behind, the entire performance collapses, not because you sabotaged it, but because it was never real to begin with. And when the performance collapses, when the script no longer has a willing actor, what remains is something the narcissist cannot tolerate: your self-worth. Not the kind that asks for permission, not the kind that proves itself through sacrifice, but the quiet, unshakable knowing of who you are and what you deserve. Self-worth changes everything. It doesn't argue with manipulation, it renders it useless. It doesn't fight for fairness, it walks away from disrespect. And for someone who relies on control, entitlement, and superiority, that kind of grounded confidence is destabilizing because self-worth exposes the imbalance that once existed. It reveals how much you gave and how little was returned. It highlights the cost of the role you played and the price you are no longer willing to pay. And once you see that clearly, there is no going back. This is where the narcissist feels threatened, not by your strength as a weapon, but by your strength as a boundary. Your confidence no longer feeds their ego. Your standards no longer bend to their moods. Your presence is no longer something they can access on demand. They sense it immediately. In the way you no longer explain yourself, in the way you don't seek validation, in the way you no longer shrink to keep the connection alive. Your self-worth becomes a mirror more confronting than your absence ever was, because it reflects what they cannot offer. And when they try to recreate the old dynamic elsewhere, they fail. Because self-worth is not something that can be controlled or extracted. It cannot be manipulated into compliance. It does not respond to guilt or fear. Your self-worth shifts the power completely, not by domination, but by disengagement. And that is why it destabilizes them, because it proves that the power they once held only existed when you doubted yourself. And as your self-worth solidifies, as your confidence anchors you in a place of clarity and peace, another truth emerges. Your freedom becomes their fear, because narcissists do not understand love as we do. They do not see connection as mutual, as liberating, or as empowering. They see attachment as control, as influence, as leverage. And when you claim your freedom, when you live without their emotional gravity holding you down, it terrifies them in ways they cannot name. Freedom is the ultimate disruption to the system they built. When you were available, even in pain, they had predictability, they had access, they had a reflection of themselves in your reactions. But the moment you step fully into autonomy, when you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop apologizing, stop bending, the illusion begins to unravel. And they feel unmoored because their sense of importance depended on your tethered energy, not on mutual respect. Your freedom becomes proof of what they cannot have, a life that isn't centered on their manipulation. It becomes a living example of boundaries that are unyielding, choices that are uncompromised, and joy that cannot be dictated. And that makes them restless, frustrated, even panicked, because they are wired to fear what they cannot dominate. And here's the striking irony. They may try to recreate that attachment and elsewhere, seeking someone to fill the gap you left, but it never works. The new supply cannot mimic your freedom. They cannot reflect your sovereignty, and that restless, unsatisfied energy follows them, a constant reminder of what was lost, not because you gave it, but because you claimed it for yourself. In claiming your freedom, you are no longer participating in the drama, no longer fueling the dependency. You are untouchable in a way they cannot tolerate, and that is why even from a distance, even while you are silent, your liberation becomes the invisible force that destabilizes everything they thought they could control. And finally, as your freedom shines and your energy settles into its rightful place, the ultimate truth becomes clear. This is not about revenge. This is not about winning, proving a point, or orchestrating their downfall. What you've created is evolution, your evolution. And that is something they cannot touch, replicate, or replace. It is living proof of the transformation that happens when you choose yourself over the script, clarity over chaos, and peace over manipulation. The narcissist may scramble, discard, or chase after illusions, but none of it alters the reality of your growth. Your journey is no longer about them. It is about you stepping into the version of yourself that always existed beneath the layers of doubt, pain, and compromise. Evolution is quiet, steady, and unstoppable. It doesn't need acknowledgement. It doesn't need validation. And that is why it terrifies them. Because evolution exposes the truth they refuse to face, that their control was never power, their influence was never love, and their attempts to replace you were doomed from the start. They cannot replicate the strength you've cultivated. They cannot mirror the clarity you now live in. They are left with the echoes of what was, while you're walking fully into what is, whole, healed, and sovereign. And the most powerful part? This evolution is irreversible. Your absence, your healing, your authenticity, your boundaries, your energy, your self-worth, your freedom, they all converge into a life that no one can manipulate, no one can diminish, and no one can discard in the same way they once discarded you. So when the narcissist discards the new supply, when chaos follows them, when emptiness lingers in what they try to create, know this: it is not your fault, it is not your doing, and it is certainly not your revenge. It is simply the natural, inevitable consequence of you choosing yourself, fully, unapologetically, and forever evolving beyond their reach. So here's the truth I want you to feel deep in your bones. Everything we've talked about, the absence, the silence, the healing, the boundaries, the freedom, it all circles back to one simple, unshakable fact. You are more powerful than you ever realized. You are not defined by their approval, their attention, or their ability to tolerate your worth. You are defined by the choices you make when no one is watching, by the courage it takes to step away from chaos, and by the life you build when you finally choose yourself. Think about it for a moment. The narcissist discards because they cannot contain the truth of your presence. The new supply fails because they cannot replicate what you naturally embodied. Every frustration they feel, every restlessness, every comparison is a silent acknowledgement of what they lost, not because they were cheated, but because you evolved. And that evolution is yours alone. This is why your journey matters so profoundly. It is not about revenge. It is not about proving something to them or anyone else. It is about remembering that your worth, your energy, your boundaries, your freedom, these are not negotiable. They cannot be stolen, diminished, or replaced. And when you step fully into that truth, everything shifts. You walk differently. You speak differently. You live differently. And the world around you notices, even when they try not to. So I want you to leave this knowing something essential. Your absence, your silence, your evolution is not emptiness. It is impact. It is transformation. It is liberation. And the power you now hold is invisible to anyone who never truly valued it, but unmistakably real to you. Stay in that power. Protect it. Grow it. Let it guide every choice you make. Because when you do, nothing, no narcissist, no manipulation, no external force can ever touch the life you are building. You are beyond their reach, you are beyond their story, and you are finally fully unstoppable.